The Netanyahu trial is not a legal process, but a political crisis. Allegations of coerced testimony and procedural flaws reveal a deep-seated attempt by elites to remove an elected leader. The ongoing criminal trial against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not merely a legal proceeding, but the epicenter of a profound political and social crisis in Israel. The cases are falling apart due to being fabricated nonsense from the start. And this outcome reveals the corruption of the Supreme Court and the Attorney General, as well as the broader judicial, media, academic, anti-Bibi complex. This narrative directly challenges the legitimacy of the state's law enforcement and legal institutions, framing the entire affair as a political attempt to remove a democratically elected leader. Now, in today's analysis, we will focus on three of the core criminal cases, 1000, 2000, and 4000. In case 4000, the defense's argument that the cases are failing due to their success during the cross-examination of key prosecution witnesses. Particularly, this case is widely considered the most serious, and this narrative does not accept the prosecution's central claim that there's a clear quid pro quo, a favor for a favor, which existed between Netanyahu and the charged individuals. Case 4000, involving alleged bribery for regulatory favors to Bezek, Israel's phone company, in exchange for positive coverage on the Walla News website, relies heavily on the testimony of former aides turned state witnesses and the investigators who secured their cooperation. On a side note, I must point out again that the Walla News website is very strongly anti-Netanyahu and has been for decades. In any case, the defense contends that the state witnesses were not reliable witnesses of their own free will, but were coerced by police investigators. The defense has focused on the intense and allegedly illegitimate pressure exerted by investigators during interrogations. For instance, claims have been made regarding threats to expose personal embarrassing information about witnesses' families or allegations of manipulating testimonies regarding knowledge of regulatory decisions. The defense asserts that the testimonies against Netanyahu were essentially extorted by investigators, making the underlying evidence fatally flawed, which can also be seen as some of the witnesses have withdrawn their statements. This narrative gains traction when cross-examination reveals inconsistencies, memory lapses, or admissions by state witnesses that they felt immense pressure to cooperate, sometimes contradicting initial accounts. The defense portrays this not as the natural stress of testimony, but as proof that the entire premise of their cooperation was invalid, thereby undermining the primary evidence of the bribery scheme. Now, a key point in the defense is the testimony of police investigators. Police was sloppy, biased, and utilized illegal methods, which casts a shadow over the entire evidence collection process. The investigator's testimony is scrutinized for any admission of procedural error or deviation from proper protocol. When a police investigator, such as police investigator Tzachi Chavkin, admitted, years after he retired, that the police went beyond their limited scope and didn't have proper authorization for what they investigated, something he could only admit to now that he is retired due to fear of reprisal within the police and the Attorney General's office, because these investigations were driven not by a search for truth, but by a partisan desire to take down the prime minister. Now, before we move on to other cases, I want to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and of course, remember in prayer the wounded and families of those hurt in yesterday's terrible attack. In case 1000, known as the gifts, the defense insists that the gifts of cigars and champagne were simply gifts of friendship from wealthy friends, Arnon Milchan and James Packer, devoid of any quid pro quo, and more, that they were used by the wealthy friends themselves as they visited the Prime Minister's dwelling. And even more than that the quantities were much smaller than are being accused. They argue that any assistance Netanyahu may have provided to Milchan, such as helping with a U.S. visa, was a standard and inconsequential gesture for a friend and not a corrupt transaction. The prosecution's attempt to criminalize common social interaction highlights the political overreach of the Attorney General's office. In case 2000, the newspaper, regarding an alleged deal with Yediot Achronot publisher Arnon Moses for favorable coverage, the defense points out that there was no deal ever finalized or executed, that it's just engagement in tough and aggressive discussions with media and not anything more, and criminalizing the talks between such people as the media and political figures is a cynical, anti-democratic move by a hostile legal establishment. And I would add to this that once again, this paper, Yediot Achronot, has always been anti-Bibi and leftist. The crumbling of the cases is not just a simple win for the defense, but reveals the involvement of the highest echelon of Israel's unelected bureaucracy in an attempt to dispose of the elected prime minister. The entire legal system, from the police to the Supreme Court, is a self-selecting, left-leaning, and unaccountable elite that uses its power to invalidate the electoral decisions of the majority. Current Attorney General Gali Barhav-Miara and State Attorney Amit Eisman are carrying forward this politically motivated agenda. This, of course, was the background of the Attorney General corruptly defending her co-conspirators, stems from the fact that she should recuse herself from matters related to this trial, as well as many others, such as the Military Advocate General's case. The defense argues that her position forces her to defend the police and prosecution against claims of procedural misconduct, thereby creating an unresolvable conflict of interest in her role as the government's top legal advisor. According to this, the Attorney General's refusal to recuse herself is proof of her commitment to protecting the prosecution team, irrespective of evidence of malpractice. The Supreme Court is the final and most powerful component of this judicial bureaucracy. Its past rulings have curtailed the power of the Prime Minister, his government, as well as the Parliament, the Knesset, often invoking the completely ludicrous and made-up principle of reasonableness. What's reasonable to you might not be reasonable to me, to overturn government decisions. And this is cited as evidence of the fact that it is overreaching and its political bias. Supreme Court Judge Amit, who fancies himself the president of the court, and Military Attorney General corruption, as well as the investigation into that corruption, reinforce the idea that it is all an interconnected deep state of legal elites which are working in coordination to achieve a political outcome through judicial means. The ongoing political push for judicial reforms is the necessary democratic response to dismantle this corrupt, unaccountable elite power structure. This trial is inseparable from the coordinated public relations campaign. The mainstream media are acting as the prosecution's mouthpiece, constantly leaking, damaging, and selective information from the investigation to create a hostile public atmosphere. The leaks of investigative testimonies and details, which come directly from law enforcement, are viewed as evidence of collusion between the prosecution and the media. This process is sought to influence public opinion and the electoral process itself, effectively trying the Prime Minister in the court of public opinion before the legal trial is concluded. In light of the anti-government protest movement, which are categorized as sources of persistent high-profile demonstrations demanding Netanyahu's resignation, which then exert extrajudicial pressure on the courts to convict. In conclusion, this is a battle for legitimacy. The situation is a zero-sum battle for legitimacy. The ongoing exposure of flawed police procedures, coerced testimonies, and the Attorney General's refusal to step aside unequivocally proves that the charges were a fabricated political construct aimed at orchestrating a soft coup. All these inconsistencies that we witness in the testimonies are a further exposure of alleged systematic corruption within Israel's legal elite, and it's quite a bit more than alleged. Whether the Jerusalem District Court ultimately acquits, convicts, or accepts a plea bargain will not simply be a legal verdict. It will be an event that either validates the long-held claims of a political witch hunt and sparks a major overhaul of the legal system, or, conversely, reaffirms the resilience of the rule of law against the most powerful man in the state. Join us next time as we examine the potential pardon of Prime Minister Netanyahu by President Herzog. May this time of year shine a light on all the hidden and corrupted places in our lives. Shalom and happy Hanukkah.